Welcome to Kol Isha, the podcast that gives Orthodox women a voice. Welcome back to Kol Isha. So this week I'm really pleased to be joined by Chavie Bruk. So Chavie is a Chabad shlucha, and she's living now in Bozeman, Montana, where she and her husband are very involved in the Chabad there. And what's extremely unique about them and their family is that they chose to build their family through adoption. And I find this so fascinating, particularly in the frum world, where it's pretty unconventional. And so I wanted to invite Chavie on to talk about it, to share with our listeners about her experiences with adoption. So welcome, Chavie. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great. So I wanted to know if you could start by just telling us a little bit about your background, like where you grew up and what brought you out to Montana, and sort of set the stage for how you and your husband decided to build your family together.
Yes. So I actually grew up in San Antonio, Texas. My parents have started the Chabad house there, and met my husband and married in 2006. Lived in Crown Heights for a year, and my husband, before we were married, he, as a yeshiva student, traveled around Montana visiting the local Jewish community here as a yeshiva student, just to provide some Jewish company, support, whatever was needed, because there wasn't really an established Jewish community here. There was some reform, but there wasn't any really strong Jewish presence in Montana. So after we got married, my husband was like, hey, do you want to move to Montana and open a permanent Chabad house here? And basically through him traveling around the state, he started to realize that really there could be something permanent here. You know, there's enough Jews, there's enough vibrancy, there's enough growing, there's enough life to really sustain a full-time Chabad house. And so I said, sure.
Wow.
And we came to visit, and we came to visit in the summer. We got married in March. We came to visit in the summer and spent like a month just traveling around the state. And I really loved it. And we decided to move here. So on our first anniversary, we moved out to Bozeman, and that's kind of how it all got started.
Wow. So as someone who grew up in the tri-state area, and I've lived in the tri-state area my whole life, it's like so incredible to me. But then I think that you grew up in San Antonio, which is also like kind of remote in terms of from community. So you probably had some degree of background in like sort of managing without, takeout and all this stuff that we're so used to here.
Yeah, my husband's a Crown Heights boy, but I grew up on shluchas in Texas, and compared to Montana, Texas is like a huge oasis of Jewish life, right? But really, especially when my parents moved out there, it was really isolated and really middle of, nowhere, and definitely did not grow up with kosher restaurants. And we definitely grew up ordering our food in, and we grew up, just really similar to how we are growing up now. And I do think that I'm just, as much as I love a good kosher restaurant, I'm not used to going out to eat. I didn't grow up that way, so I don't miss it as much. My husband, the first second he lands in New York or from community, he's like on to the sushi, like that's his first thought.
Find the kosher food.
And I love a good restaurant, but it's just, for me, I'm just so much more used to living that life of isolation from the amenities of a Jewish community. Like, I just didn't grow up with them.
Wow.
So it's a lot easier for me.
Sure. Even still, it's a huge sacrifice because, you could have easily just moved somewhere where things could have been a little easier in terms of, your from lifestyle. So in terms of how you guys wound up building your family, can you give us a little background as to like why you decided to go with adoption? What gave you that idea, and how that decision-making process went for you guys?
Sure. So we were a typical frum couple, getting married and really expecting to grow our family and have tons of kids, and that was always a dream of mine, and what I just know and used to, and was super excited to start, building my family. And it turned out not to be that simple for us. And, a year in, and I wasn't pregnant, we decided to start pursuing, trying to find out, what was going on, We weren't super alarmed. We were just like, okay, maybe it's time to start doing some testing and figuring out what's going on. And so we started that process, and we already were living in Montana, so it's difficult because not only is Montana isolated in the sense of a frum community, but we live in a very small town, which also means that medically we don't have specialists, right? We don't have fertility specialists or pediatric specialists or all those kinds of things. So for me to start that journey, I did have to travel quite a bit at both of us, but we would go to New York and we would see the doctors when we could, and sometimes we'd go in special, and our journey was really unique because it ended up just being pretty quick in the sense that it wasn't like, okay, then all of a sudden we have years and years and years of testing and procedures. We came to the point where through the testing that we had done was really we have one procedure that will make or break our chances of having biological children. And it was like all our eggs in one basket. And so it was this thing, and if this thing didn't work, that was it. And so, obviously we have a lot of faith, and we're really, we're pretty strong, and we scheduled that procedure, and, obviously nervous, but really going in, not thinking that, just expecting a positive outcome, because that's what we're trained to do. We're supposed to, think positive and it'll be positive. And as it turned out, the outcome wasn't what we expected. And the doctor, after the procedure, with not the best bedside manner, just was basically in four words, changed our whole life and pulled the rug out of under us. And he said, I'm sorry, the procedure wasn't successful, and you're not ever having biological children. That was it.
Wow.
Boom, bomb, And I was 23. I can't remember I think I was 23. My husband was 26. And really young to have this life-altering thing happen, And sometimes I think it was actually pretty good that I was young. You're a little bit younger and more naive and more, resilient in the sense, and that was just really how it all started. And, we had to take some time to process. And I think, honestly, 14 years later, we still have to process, because that's something that is always in front of you.
Sure.
But, taking that time to process, and I really came to the conclusion that I really I didn't feel, for me, everybody's different, but for me, I felt like I couldn't be in this world without creating a family. It was so much a part of who I was and what I wanted that I just wasn't ready to give that up. And so what we decided was we were going to find a way to do it. And through research and understanding all the different options that there were to build a family when you weren't doing it biologically, and also all the halachic ramifications, we settled on adoption being the path that we wanted to take. And that's kind of how the idea of creating a family through adoption took place.
Wow. So there's a lot to unpack in that story. First of all,
I just threw a lot at you.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, describing the moment of when you were told you were never going to have biological children and you had to give up on your dreams so quickly is just took my breath away. And then the fact that you at such a young age with your husband were able to, I'm sure it took time and you're saying it very succinctly, but the fact that you were able to move forward in such a positive way is just incredible. So,
well, I always tell people that I'm a really impatient person, actually. And so I'm not a very good, dweller necessarily, which has its really good qualities and which has its negative qualities, And so I was just all about, okay, I'm going to just find another way to do this. And the good thing is that I think that if I would have dwelled too much, I might have fallen into a hole that I wouldn't have been able to crawl out of. But the flip side of that is sometimes you don't take the time to grieve properly, and those kind of stuff can come up later. So I've definitely, over the last 14 years, have worked, through therapy, through all other mindful activities to process those things, and it's still a continuing, journey. But I think Hashem has a plan, and He gave me the energy to push forward because that's what I needed to do in the moment. And then once I was secure enough in who I was and what my mission was and why I'm in this world, then I was able to go back later and kind of unpack some of that grief,
Wow. So your faith really helped you through the grief process and come to terms with your situation.
100%. I always talk, I do go around and lecture quite a bit about our family journey, and my lecture is always about my journey through faith. Like, I really feel like there's no other way I would have been able to pull through if I didn't believe that there's a bigger picture and Hashem running the show. Then I'd be like, what am I doing here? Like, what's the purpose? But just really being able to fall back on this idea that I don't run the show and there's a bigger picture that I don't get to see, right? I don't get to know the inner workings of God and why He does the things that He does. But I do know that He knows what He's doing, right? And so I just have to embrace the path that He's put in front of me.
Wow, it's a really inspiring worldview, and it's something that I think everyone aspires to. Like, different people have to work through different issues that come up through their lives, and I think this mentality and this mindset and growth process is something that we all strive for. But when you have such a life-altering moment, and to be able to put it in that perspective is really, really incredible. So something that you touched on were the halachic ramifications of adoption, and I haven't really given much thought to that until you mentioned it. So would you expound a little on that? Like, what were some of the halachic issues that you had to address and work through, or that present themselves with adoption?
Right, and definitely I will get into that a little bit. And also, what else I was also referring to is the halachic ramifications of all other options of building a family, and actually adoption was the least halachically problematic, than some other things. And the halachic ramifications of adoption could be intense, and I get a lot of questions about that, and my answer is usually taking one step at a time, right? If we would actually think about all the steps it would take to physically give birth and all the hardships that entails, we would be paralyzed, right? So the same thing goes for adoption. Like, if I were to dwell and think about every single thing and every single obstacle, then you're right, I would be stuck and I wouldn't do it. But I took on the outlook of we'll cross that bridge when we get there, right? And so some of the halachic ramifications that people ask about all the time is shomer negia, yichud, all that, most of those kinds of things, like how do you deal with that? And my answer is that there's a lot of different opinions, and a lot of different ravs and rabbis will steer you differently, and you just really have to trust the halachic authority that's guiding your family, and that's who is your rock, right? And that's who's going to get you through these complicated situations. So for me, I might do one thing and another family will do another thing, but this is the kind of thing that is such an individual basis. So to protect my family's privacy, I don't think it's necessarily important to know what we do as a family, but it is important to know that these are issues, these are things that are addressed, and we feel really grateful that we have such support and family guidance to walk us through this in a halachic way, but that also fits with our family values and how we want to raise our children. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I assume when you say like the halachic ramifications of other methods, you're talking about things like surrogacy and egg donation and sperm donation and things like that.
Yeah, egg donation, sperm donation, surrogacy, those kinds of things can be, not to say I don't know enough about it to make any have any opinions on them, but for us, when we were researching them, it seemed a lot more complicated.
They are very halachically complex, yeah.
Yeah, to go that route. And I also felt really strongly of my husband and I both being on the same page, and so meaning like we're both in the same boat. We're both adopting a child that is outside of us, and I felt that for us in that moment was a really healthy way to go. And that's what we chose for our family.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how many kids do you have now?
So thank God I have 5, all through adoption.
Wow. So would you want to share any of like the individual adoption stories, like how they came to be part of your families?
I can touch briefly because I will be here all night with all my 5 kids' story, but I will go kind of down the line and briefly talk about each one. And they're all such special stories, and we can write a book about each one. But so briefly, our first adoption is my daughter Chaya, who's 10 and a half, and she was born in Russia, but was in the States for medical evaluation. She was born 9 weeks early, and so she was 3 pounds, a preemie that went through a lot of medical procedures and difficulties, and was touch and go for a while. So she was brought to the States just to up her medical care that she needed, and then it turns out that she needed an adoptive family, and my husband's really close friend was involved in this story, and he was actually the only person we told in the beginning that we were looking for adoption.
Wow.
And he was the one that had this opportunity and called us, and he's like, you guys really serious? Because I have a situation. And we were, and so 10 and a half years ago, Chaya was 10 weeks when we adopted her, and we adopted her in New Jersey, and she was our first, and it was surreal, I'll remember always, like yesterday, just standing in the adoption agency and getting handed this little tiny newborn. I mean, she was almost 3 months, but she was the size of a tiny little newborn, and just like, it almost was like, I can't believe this is happening, right? But like threw us right into motherhood and parenthood, actually, obviously, and it was an unbelievable experience. And then 10 months later, we adopted our second child, Zizi, who was born in New Jersey as well. And we adopted her. She has a whole other story because she was born 3 weeks early, and we were in Texas for Yontif for Sukkot, and she was born on the first day of Shmini Atzeres on the 3-day Yontif. And we weren't in New York, we weren't in New Jersey, and so we got a fax. Like back then, 9.5 years ago, there were faxes, and we were just like a fax that it's a girl, how much she weighed, and we need to come get her, and we're like, we aren't there. Like, how are we going to figure this out? But long story short, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, the second after Yontif from Crown Heights, sped to New Jersey. We had the lawyers sign, we gave permission for them to pick her up, and we flew the next morning, and we met her for the first time at Newark Airport.
Wow.
And so she is 9.5, so they're 13 months apart, age-wise, but they were adopted 11 months apart. And Zizi has a whole nother story. She, was diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder at age 1. Not diagnosed. She started symptoms at age 1 with seizures and a bunch of other things. Diagnosed at age 5 with GLUT1, which is a really rare genetic disorder, which is a whole nother story. Maybe we'll have to do a second, one about that. And then that's Zizi, and then my son, whose birthday is tomorrow,
happy birthday!
We adopted him 7 years ago from birth. He's unique because he's biracial. He's Black, and a pretty awesome kid, and just brings a whole nother dimension to family, and a whole nother dimension of opening up ourselves up to more experiences and more opportunities to really, be open to the world and the whole racial aspect of that, and how we get to expose our family to that, and how, it's been a really awesome, a special experience, and it will come with its challenges down the road, and has its challenges already, but, wouldn't trade it for the world. And then our fourth child was unique in the sense that we adopted her at age 12. So previously just babies, and now we were presented with this, or literally on our doorstep, a situation of a beautiful 12-year-old girl who needed a home. And so for almost 4 years ago, we adopted Shoshana at age 12, and that, as you can imagine, is a whole different animal. Adopting a baby is a completely different thing than adopting a preteen. So that comes with its journey and its ups and downs and all arounds, but it's also another unique and special aspect of our family. And then Hanalea, who's 2.5, is our Montana baby. She was born in Montana, and we adopted her 20 minutes away. So it was so great because already having a bigger family, we didn't have to pick up and go somewhere for 3 weeks. And, my family was home. I went to the hospital, stayed there for a couple of days, came home with a baby. And it was a pretty cool experience. So that's kind of in like a nutshell, like 1% of the actual stories, but kind of gives you an idea.
Wow. So again, so much to unpack. Like you said, I think you gave such a brief overview, but every one of their stories sounds so fascinating. Like I would like to do a whole episode on each one of their stories.
Exactly.
Wow. That's incredible. So the fact that, you guys opened up your lives to so many different children from so many different backgrounds and so many different situations, it's really amazing to think about, because when people have family of their own biological children, of course, each one is different, each one's unique,
sure.
Each one has their own issues and things. But this is like so beyond that, the fact that you're dealing with one biracial child, one medically complex child, and different backgrounds, different places of birth, one's from another country, different ethnicities.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I can't even imagine it. But it sounds like you are so like graceful about it. It's really, really beautiful. So
thank you.
So what are some of like the challenges that you've been facing that you would say are maybe different than a biological family?
So that's a really good question. I always tell people, I'm like, I don't really know what it's like to raise biological children, except that I was a biological child, right?
Right.
And I, had a big family, and all my siblings have tons of kids and whatever. But I don't personally know what that experience is like. But I do know just from my experience and just being an adoptive mom. First of all, how wonderful it is, but also the fact that it's not the same, right? Every unique experience has its challenges, and I found that just recognizing that and being open about that is really important, because when we try to be like, oh, all children have challenges, and yes, that's true, but there are a specific set of challenges that come with adoption, and that's okay, right? And it is true that every person has a challenge. And what I've also learned from just going around and speaking everywhere is that everybody has a story, right? So my story is my story, and it sounds unique to a lot of people. But, you open yourself up and tell people your story, and then you are able to receive so many other people's stories and just learn so much from everybody, and how everybody has such an interesting and fascinating life. And life, I don't think I've ever met someone that said life is a piece of cake, like everybody has something that they're working on, overcoming, working through. Anyways, but that's a digression. But so the challenges of adoption, it's an interesting question, because on the one hand, if someone is looking to adoption, it's really important to really know what you're signing up for and what what you're doing. But I also think it's important to also have your own experiences, and not have someone tell you this is what it's like to have an adopted child, right? Because for every situation is so different. But from my experience of having 5 adopted children, I do, and from all the books and research that I've done, and parenting classes, and all my kids' therapists, and everyone that I've worked with, is there is an attachment break for an adoptive child, no matter if they're adopted from birth or at 12 or 15 or 7, right? So that initial attachment of when a child is born from their birth mom, and that's who they're used to, right? They're used to that, the rhythm, the sound of their voice, their atmosphere, and then the second that they're born, they are handed to someone who's not their mom, right? Mm-hmm. That's an attachment break. Every kid will handle that differently, but it is a thing, and it is going to need to be handled. And that's my biggest kind of thing that I've learned through all my children is is and it's a subconscious thing for them. They don't necessarily understand that, and they will understand that when, obviously you're open about it and you talk about it, but, there's some behaviors that they don't know why they're behaving that way, right? Like, so just being really open and understanding that attachment break exists. I think it's the biggest favor you can give to your child, because when you're informed and you know what to look for and what to look out for, you can be prepared and you can support it in the best way possible, instead of like avoiding it or not being aware or pretending it doesn't exist or wishing it away. Like, those things aren't going to work,
Right.
So when you are really open about, like, yes, I'm building my family through adoption. I love my children to pieces. We have a unique family, and with that unique family comes unique challenges, and we're going to face them and we're going to deal with them, and that's kind of, there's a myriad of other things that, are unique to adoption. But if I were to pull out one thing that is the most probably prominent, would be that.
Very fascinating. Actually, I'm going to do a little plug here, but one of my previous episodes that I did with a trauma therapist was about attachment. So I didn't know a ton about attachment, but I found out a lot, and it's a really, really fascinating topic. But it sounds like, going in with that knowledge and being open to it, like you said, and you mentioned that your kids are in therapy and stuff. So it sounds like you're doing a really great job being proactive so that they don't wind up having negative effects later on and then have to deal with it as an adult. Rather, they're dealing with it as they go through it. Is that right?
Yes, 100%. And to be trauma informed is extremely important, and I think just life-changing. And I've been able to do that over the years. And when I first adopted my first, I was really naive, and especially because I didn't really have any mentors or anyone who's done it before in the frum circles. Like, it was very a unique thing. It wasn't really done that so much. I'm sure there are people who have done it, but not anybody that I knew, or anybody remotely, even researching. Like, it was hard to find, and so, but over the years and being open, I love to learn, and I'm so grateful for that, because, reading and understanding and putting these things into practice makes all the difference. And that trauma piece is a big deal. So the more you can inform yourself on that, the better, everyone is going to be. And the other thing about this is journey, and this is true to everybody in any relationship or any, children, is understanding what's their journey and what's your role in their journey, right? So their journey is they're going to have to figure out a lot of themselves and their life, and you are there to support, guide, be their safety net. But sometimes we want something so badly for our children, or we think this is what's best for our children, and we don't get to control all of that necessarily, right? And so one of the big things that I've learned, over the years, is just letting go of the outcomes, right? And just doing what you know how to do, being the best parent you can be, and then understanding that there's a path, and there's a journey, and there's a whole world in your child that you don't get to decide and determine how that goes.
I think
does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's so true, not only for adoptive children, but for biological children too. And that's something that, like, I've had, I've thought about a lot, where our kids are their own unique worlds. Even if they do share our DNA, we don't get to control them, and they come with their own personalities. So
yes, and that's what I said in the beginning. Like, this applies to everybody, even your spouse, right? Like, anybody, you can do you. You get to control how you react to a situation. You get to control how you want to parent. You get to control what kind of role model you want to be. But it kind of ends there, right? And just understanding that piece of, like, not owning all my children's troubles and angst and anxiety, and I don't have to absorb that for them. It's not good for them, and it's not good for me. It's obviously very, very hard to do, and that's one of the hardest things, because they're your child and you feel so deeply for them and you want them to be happy. But when you let that go of what you want for them, and be present in what you actually have control of, it's life-changing.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's not something that's easy. It's a lot easier said than done. But
oh my gosh, I don't think I'll say a bold thing, but I don't think we ever reach the end and be like, oh my gosh, I got it.
I'm done now.
It's a constant struggle, a constant journey, but that's what life is, right? We're never reached the pinnacle. We're always striving to do better and to be better and to learn, right? That's what we're here in this world for.
Sure. And then that speaks to also the other piece of what you were saying in terms of letting go and lowering your expectations about the outcomes and things. The other piece of that is faith, right? And just believing that Hashem
100%.
You'll do your best and Hashem will do the rest, as they say. But really,
Yes. Yeah, for real. It's a real thing.
So what have you found to be the response and the attitude of your unique family within the Frum community? And I know, you're sort of outside of a large Frum community, so maybe, it would be a little different for you than if you were living in like Brooklyn or Crown Heights. But how have your neighbors, your community members, your family dealt with this? Has there been any issues? Have people been receptive?
Okay, so great question, and a question that I get often. I am so blessed to have a family. Both my husband's family and my family have been nothing but supportive and with us on this journey and excited and just the best support I can ever ask for. I always say, like, we always sprung these like crazy things on our family, like, oh, by the way, we're adopting a 12-year-old tomorrow, or by the way, like, and they've done so good at just adapting, and I'm sure that my parents and siblings and my husband's siblings I'm sure they needed their own time to process that and work that through, but they never made us part of that process, right? They did their work, however they needed to process that information, but we never felt judged or looked differently or down upon. Like, it was done with such grace, and I know how special that is, because I'm sure not all families are like that, and I feel so grateful to have had that immense just support from the beginning. And the same for my community in Bozeman. They have just been like the best, just love our family, support our family so much. Our cheerleaders we're really surrounded by so many supportive people. Now, when you leave your little comfort zone and you travel or you go to, a Frum community, there's always looks and there's always, who knows, what judgments people are making. But what I've found, is that whatever you put out there in the world, that's what you're going to get back. So when you put out the confidence and the attitude of like, this is my family and I own it and I'm not ashamed of it. I love it. I embrace it. This is normal. So then that's what you're going to get back. People are just embracing it because you're so confident in it. It's like almost weird. Like, why should I be weirded out by your family choice if you're not, right? So, they mirror your attitude. So when if you walk into the street and for example, me being embarrassed to walk with my son Manny because he's black, then that's the kind of feedback you're going to get, right? But if I walk with my son Manny in the street and I'm like, I don't even register the fact that it's weird because it's so normal for us, it starts to be normal for everybody else too. Now, not to say I don't have the experience of living in a Frum community, so I think that's a little bit of a different challenge, and I don't know necessarily what that's like. I know what it's like to live in a rural community that's predominantly white and very not diverse. Like, even though we're not in a Frum community, we're in Bozeman, Montana, which is 95% white. Like, we don't have diversity,
Wow.
So it's not in the Frum aspect of it, but it's just in the world aspect of it. Manny's one of a very few people that are colored, So it just I really feel like what you put out there, what you put out into the universe is what you get back.
I think you're very right. And I've seen similar kind of things like, just speaking of like things that are a little unconventional, in terms of families or moms of kids who have special needs, right? A lot of it is fed off of the parents' attitude and the family's attitude. Like I've seen families where I'm just blown away how their special needs children are so normalized, and there's no shame, like you said, there's no weirdness, and the response they get in return mirrors that exactly. So I think it can be like extrapolated to other situations that are quote unquote unconventional. It's very, very true.
Oh, for sure. And for anything, it's the way you carry yourself, the way your attitude is, it's like, it is, it's almost like karma. It's like what you put out there is what the energy you're putting out there is the energy, like it's energetic, like I fully believe that. Like, and sometimes we do our best, and sometimes what we're putting out there isn't what we, 100% think is the right thing, but we do our best, and if the most times that we can put out there positive energy and just comfortable in our own skin, the more that does us good.
Absolutely. So if there's anyone listening who thought maybe adoption might be an option for them, something that they've considered or even just had like the most brief fleeting thought about, or someone who might be very, very strongly considering adoption, as someone who's been through it in so many different ways, what would be your advice? I'm sure you got questions, like if somebody called you and said, hey, I'm considering it, I'm a frum person, maybe the kid's from an unconventional situation, like some of your own. What would be your response to a question like that?
Okay, so first of all, my husband and I talk to a lot of people all the time about this. I actually have a blog called clearasmud.blog, and has a lot of amazing, just life, experiences for myself. But if anyone ever wants to reach out, they can email me through that blog. And the other thing is what I say is a few things. First of all, the most important thing is to make sure you and your husband are on the same page. This is not something you want to go into being split or having any hard feelings about, because this is a very big undertaking. It's an emotional roller coaster, and you need to be a team. So that's number one. Number two is, if this is something that you're really serious about, get all your legalities under control. So meaning you need to be a legal adoptive parent. So what that means is you need to find out in your state who, through which organization are you doing your home study, your home visits, your fingerprints, all that stuff takes a little while, takes a couple months, and the home study process is it's not bad, but it takes time. So that's the first and foremost thing you want to do, because once you start looking for an adoption, and let's say something comes up right away, and then you're like, oh, no, wait, we don't have our home study, we're not legal, then you lose out. So before you even look for a baby necessarily, you want to make sure that all your legalities are all set up and you have all your ducks in a row. So that's my first suggestion. And then second of all, third of all, I'm probably up to third of all, I don't even know. But then you want to decide, and like, how open are you to, what are you willing to look at, and what kind of guidelines are you looking for? Are you looking for only a newborn? Are you looking for only a child that's Jewish from birth? Are you looking for, no child with special needs? Like, you have to, you start to, kind of make your kind of give yourself an idea of what you're looking for. And then unfortunately, there hasn't been, there's no Jewish adoption agency. So, you really are either left to doing private adoptions, which is you put the word out there, you hear of a situation, you find your own scenario, and then you hire lawyers and you go that route, or you sign up for an adoption agency, and the guy, it's a little bit less, DIY, it's more structured and has its ups and, everything has its pros and cons. So just really researching on what you're looking for. And then, going, just, diving in and being prepared for the roller coaster,
Wow. So that's some really good advice. And then, so that's more on like a technical nature. And then, of course, like every situation is different. But if you could give some advice that's to more of like the, I guess, emotional or mental preparation, is there anything you can say about that? Like, I guess you touched on it a little bit when you said, you have to think of what you're willing to take on and stuff like that.
And being on the same page with your husband is really important. And then the other thing is that, to me, I almost say, like, there's sometimes, I don't know, sometimes it's not true, but never too much information, and just reading, being, opening yourself up to learning and understanding and being almost like a empty vessel, right? And like allowing, the more you open yourself up, the more opportunities you give yourself. So the more you can just breathe into it and be open to the universe and Hashem and what he, has in store for you, the more opportunities you're going to have, right? So just really, but also you got to stay true to yourself. So if you're not ready for a biracial situation or a special needs situation, then don't do it, because you're not doing a favor for you or for the child, right? So really, I think it's one of the best things that I've learned through this journey is really digging deep and blocking out the noise. So you have to block out what your mom is telling you, and what this person's telling you, and what the norm is, and what the expectations are, and what's, you need to be able to silence that and really go inside yourself and be like, what is right for me? And when you do that, you will get your answers. You will be guided, because our gut and our soul and our, we knows what we need and what's best for us. It's just when everything else gets in the way, we get distracted and we get pulled and we get, peer pressured into things that we don't feel good about, right? So when you can block that out and really make decisions based on your values, which for this audience are going to be Torah values, right? Your Torah values, but also your personal and, values and what rings true for you and what you are capable of and can handle. And there's no shame in anything, because it's you, right? And you know yourself best. So don't let people tell you what to do.
There is so much incredible insight that you have. I think, obviously this is all in the context of adoption, but it's so much more that could be used just in life in general. Yeah, it's all universal. Exactly. It's user friendly in a lot of different scenarios.
Exactly.
Wow. So your story, I know it's an ongoing story. It's not a story of the past, but it's a story that's of the present and keeps going. But, I'm really, really fascinated by your strength of character and what you've taken on, which I think, like you said, everyone has to assess what their own abilities are. And clearly you've done a lot of that, but it's so different than what most people, I think, could do and are willing to do, but maybe not. Maybe if people would, dig deep, like you said, you would find that there's a lot more strength than you thought. Because I'm sure when you were newlywed, you didn't think that this was going to be your life in 15 years.
You never think this is going to be your life or what you're going to be able to do. And I honestly, there are so many times where I'm like, God, you got the wrong person. I actually can't do this. I actually, but he knows, and he knows better. But sometimes I'm like, go pick on someone your own size. Like I've got enough on my plate, and sometimes I really do struggle. I mean, not sometimes. A lot of the times I struggle, and I feel like I actually can't do this. It's there's certain situations or scenarios where I'm just overwhelmed and it feels too much, and and that's okay. I've learned through therapy that I need to let those feelings move through me and not try to push them away, because when you try to push away these feelings, they first of all add shame, because you feel guilty and you don't think you deserve to feel certain ways, and we all deserve to feel the way we want to feel, right? Like that's just a right that we have. But what I've learned from not trying to push away those feelings and being super strong and being like, I'm not going to fall into that hole, is that it comes up sideways later. And so what I've learned, and which is so valuable, is when I'm feeling those feelings of overwhelm or jealousy or exhaustion or despair, or that I feel like there's no hope, I sit with them and I'm like, you know what, guess what, and that depends, each feeling is different, but do I need an hour, do I need a day, or do I need a week, right? Sometimes I tell my husband, I'm like, this is going to be a bad week, I'm just telling you, I'm not in a good place, right? But then I let myself be in that bad place. I wallow a little bit. I'm there and I'm present and I'm owning those feelings. And what I've discovered is that then I move through them and then I'm out the other side.
Wow, I love that. And I love that, you're presenting a side of reality. Everyone deals with these emotions. Yeah.
Yes, it's not all roses. And it is like, when I speak, I'm very clear on, like, yes, I have a strong faith and I've overcome a lot of challenges, but it's not pretty. Sometimes it doesn't look pretty, and sometimes it's really dark. And but when we allow ourselves to be there and not shame ourselves for those feelings, I think most of where the trouble comes from is feeling shame for, like, oh, so many people have it worse, or I don't deserve to feel this way, or why do I even feel this way, or why should I be jealous of all the people who are pregnant when I have a beautiful family with 5 children? Like, why does that still bother me sometimes? And you know what? Instead of analyzing that and not thinking I deserve to have those feelings, I have them, right? And I have them, and I let them be. And then guess what? Usually, I can move through it so much quicker, and I move through it in a healthy way. And then I'm done, and then I'm ready to move on, and I'm a happy, functioning, healthy person.
It's a great coping skill for life, because everyone in their own unique situation, like you said, everyone has a story, and so everyone's going to encounter things like that. And I like to go back to this because I think it's so important to point it out in today's day and age that, what we see on social media, people try to always put their best foot forward, which is so understandable. Like, no one wants to see you kvetch on social media, but it also creates, as much as we know that it's not real life, it still is giving us this illusion of other people's perfection as much as we tell ourselves. We know it's not that way. We know it's only portraying the good moments, but you don't see the bad moments, or you don't have that to balance out. So, what you're saying is so true and so usable for everybody, really.
Yes, 100%. And that's also a work in progress, and sometimes we fail and sometimes we succeed, and that's life. Right? And when we fail, we pick ourselves up and we try again.
It's ongoing.
Yeah. And honestly, like, if the one message that you take out of this podcast is the immense positive impact therapy can have, is unbelievable. And that's changed my life. And just, I think, nowadays it's becoming less of a stigma, but I think sometimes in the femme community it still could be. And I don't think you have to be messed up or broken to have a therapist. Like, I always say, like, if every person in this world had a therapist, the world would be a much better place, Like, I've seen firsthand for myself, for my family, what that does, and the support and the positive effects of that are just unimaginable. So anyone who is struggling, and anyone who's even not struggling, and just having that objective support system is life-changing. And it's really what's allowed me to move through this, obviously with my faith, but also with that support and that understanding, and learning more about myself, and learning about how our brain works and how our mind works and how our emotions work has just been invaluable.
So, Chavie, I thought we were going to have a conversation all about adoption, but I think we've covered a lot of other topics too, including in a really good way.
There's so much to talk about. I could talk about anything for hours. I'm super passionate about a lot of things, as you can tell. That's why I did start my blog, and that's why I have an Instagram presence. But really, that's why I started my blog, because I'm like, I just have so many things to say, so I need somewhere to put them.
But look, it's all interwoven, right? I mean, you can't take adoption in a bubble.
All connected.
Yeah, it's not one aspect of your life is in a bubble. Obviously, it's all functioning within, who you are as a person, and who your kids are as people, and how you guys are getting through this unique life. So,
yes, 100%.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. I hope that people will gain from it and think about, considering different options that they might not have thought of beforehand. I know, you were put in this position not as your choice initially, but you've done an incredible job of the circumstances you were given. So, for anybody listening, you said your blog is called
Clear as Mud, like life, right? Life is as clear as mud, .blog.
Okay, so that's a really great resource to check out. And then on Instagram, you are under
my name, just Chavie, Chavie, Bruk, Bruk.
All right, so everybody who's listening, check those out. Chavie, as you have just heard, is an incredible resource, an incredible person. I'm so honored that you gave us your time. And I really just want to wish you and your family all the best. You're really an inspiration. And I hope a lot of people have gained from your story.
Well, thank you so much for having me on here. It was a lot of fun. And I hope that if this can provide some comfort or some practical information or, whatever support that, anybody's looking for in their lives, I'm happy.
Thank you so much.